Formula One is facing a serious new controversy after drivers reportedly lashed out following the Hungarian Grand Prix. On July 24, 2026, reports linked to GP Fans and Racing News 360 pointed to huge problems for the sport, but the most explosive detail is still missing. The available source does not identify the drivers, reveal their exact statements, or explain what happened in Hungary to trigger such a furious reaction. And that changes everything. Because when Formula One drivers speak out publicly, they are rarely reacting to one isolated moment. The real issue can involve safety, fairness, penalties, racing standards, or a loss of trust inside the sport itself. Whatever happened after Hungary was serious enough to create a major warning for Formula One. But until the missing statements are revealed, one question hangs over the entire grid. What pushed the drivers far enough to finally lash out? Subscribe to the channel. To understand why this reaction could become a huge problem for Formula One, you first have to look at what driver criticism really means inside the paddock. Drivers complain all the time. They complain about traffic. They complain about tires. They complain about strategy. They complain when another car gets too close, when a decision goes against them, or when a race does not unfold the way they expected. Most of that disappears quickly. One interview ends. The next session begins. The focus moves on. But when several drivers appear to lash out after the same Grand Prix, the situation becomes different. That suggests the frustration may not be personal. It may be structural. Something about the race weekend may have created a problem that reached beyond one team, one result, or one disappointing afternoon. And that is where the danger begins. The available source points to reports linked to GP Fans and Racing News 360 on July 24, 2026, but it does not provide the drivers' names, their exact words, or the specific issue behind the backlash. That means the reaction is part of the source's framing. The cause is not. And without the actual statements, several very different stories remain possible. The drivers may have been angry about racing standards. They may have questioned the consistency of penalties. They may have raised concerns about safety. They may have criticized the circuit, the conditions, or the way officials handled an incident. But none of those possibilities are confirmed in the attached material. That distinction matters, because each complaint would create a different problem for Formula One. A dispute over penalties would raise questions about fairness. A dispute over racing standards would affect how drivers battle each other. A safety complaint would place pressure on the sport to act immediately. And a wider criticism of decision-making could damage trust across the entire grid. Those are not small consequences. Formula One depends on drivers making instant decisions at enormous speed. They need to know what is allowed. They need to know what will be punished. They need to trust that the circuit is safe enough to attack. And they need to believe that serious concerns will be heard. If any one of those foundations begins to weaken, the problem spreads. A driver becomes more cautious. A team changes its instructions. Another driver interprets the limit differently. And suddenly, two people arrive at the same corner with completely different expectations. That is how uncertainty becomes conflict. Think of driving through a city where every traffic light changes, meaning without warning. At one junction, yellow means slow down. At the next, it seems to mean accelerate. Even the best driver would begin to hesitate. Formula One drivers cannot afford that hesitation. They operate too quickly. A decision that feels uncertain for half a second can cost a position. It can cause contact. It can end a race. That is why clear rules matter so much. The rules do not only decide penalties after an incident. They shape the incident before it happens. A driver attacks because he believes the move is legal. A rival defends because he believes he is entitled to the racing line. Both decisions come from their understanding of the same standard. If that standard feels inconsistent, racing becomes harder to control. And this is where public criticism becomes dangerous for Formula One. When one driver speaks out, the sport can treat it as frustration. When several drivers express the same concern, the issue becomes harder to dismiss. Drivers compete against each other. They rarely agree on everything. Their teams have different interests. One rule may help one driver and hurt another. So, when frustration appears across several parts of the grid, the sport has to ask whether the problem is larger than one result. But the source does not tell us whether the criticism was coordinated. It does not confirm that drivers made a shared statement. It does not even reveal whether they were angry about the same issue. That uncertainty is important. The headline creates the impression of a united backlash. The evidence needed to prove that unity is missing. Still, the possibility alone explains why the story sounds so serious. A united grid can create pressure that one driver cannot. Teams begin asking questions. Officials face demands for clarification. Past incidents are brought back into the discussion, and fans begin comparing decisions from race to race. That is when one complaint becomes a debate about the credibility of the sport. The Hungarian Grand Prix adds another layer. Hungary is a circuit where precision matters. The track is tight. The corners are connected. Small mistakes carry into the next section. Track position can be difficult to recover. And because overtaking is often challenging, any decision that affects a battle can feel even more significant. A driver who loses a position through an incident may not get another chance. A penalty can reshape the result. A safety decision can change strategy. And an unclear ruling can leave drivers feeling that hours of work were decided somewhere other than the track. That emotion can build quickly. Imagine spending an entire race protecting one position. You manage the tires. You control the pace. You defend under pressure. Then, after the race, the conversation is no longer about what you achieved. It is about a decision you do not understand. Even when officials believe they acted correctly, the driver may feel powerless. And powerlessness often sounds like anger. But here is what most people miss. Drivers do not only speak for themselves when they criticize the sport. They also send messages to their teams, to officials, and to each other. A public complaint can be a warning. It can say, "This problem is not going away." It can say, "The private conversations have not worked." It can say, "The next incident may create an even larger reaction." That is why the exact wording matters so much. Did the driver's demand change? Did they question a decision? Did they warn about safety? Did they accuse the sport of inconsistency? The source does not tell us. And without those words, the scale of the problem cannot be measured accurately. But the timing after Hungary still matters. Drivers speak differently immediately after a race. The pressure is fresh. The adrenaline has not fully disappeared. They remember every moment, every close battle, every instruction, every decision that helped or hurt them. That can produce honest reactions. It can also produce emotional ones. The challenge is separating frustration from a deeper warning. One angry sentence may fade by the next weekend. A repeated concern does not. If the same issue appears in several interviews from drivers in different teams, then Formula One has a problem that cannot be solved by waiting for the news cycle to move on. Sport must explain. It must clarify. And in some cases, it must change. That is the first major question behind this controversy. Were the drivers reacting to one heated moment after the Hungarian Grand Prix? Or were they revealing a problem that had been building long before the race began? Because if the anger came from one incident, the story may end with an explanation. But if Hungary exposed a pattern, then Formula One may be facing something much harder to repair: a loss of trust. And if trust is the real issue, then Hungary may have exposed something far more serious than one angry interview. Because trust in Formula One is not built through words. It is built through repetition. The same rule applied the same way. The same safety standard respected every weekend. The same explanation strong enough to survive pressure. When that consistency disappears, drivers notice immediately. They remember what happened before. They compare one incident with another. They ask why one action was punished while another was ignored. And once those comparisons begin, the argument becomes much harder to contain. That is where frustration turns into a wider conflict. The attached source does not reveal the exact complaints made after Hungary. It does not provide the names of the drivers, their statements, or the specific decision they challenged. So the central cause remains unconfirmed. But the headline frames the reaction as serious enough to create huge problems for Formula One. That means the real story may not be what happened in one corner. It may be what the drivers believe that moment represents. A pattern, a warning, a standard they no longer understand. And this is where things become dangerous for the sport. Drivers need confidence before they commit to a move. Not confidence that they will succeed. Confidence that they understand the consequences. They need to know how much space must be left. They need to know when a position must be returned. They need to know whether contact will be treated as a racing incident or a punishable offense. They need to know whether the same standard will exist at the next Grand Prix. Without that clarity, every battle carries two risks. The risk of losing control on the track, and the risk of losing the result later. That second risk changes the way people race. A driver may back out of a move he once would have attempted. Another may push harder because he believes officials have allowed more aggression. Two drivers can enter the same corner with completely different ideas about where the boundary sits. That is not only confusing, it can become unsafe. Think of two people running toward the same doorway. One believes he has the right to enter first. The other believes he is entitled to the space. Neither slows down. The collision is not created by speed alone. It is created by two different understandings of the same situation. Formula One works the same way, only at far greater speed and with much greater consequences. This is why racing standards matter. They are not just words written in regulations. They shape instinct. Drivers study past decisions and build a mental picture of what officials will accept. That picture guides them before they brake, before they turn, before they place the car beside a rival. If the picture becomes unclear, instinct becomes hesitation. And hesitation at Formula One speed can change everything. But there is another layer. The drivers may not only be angry about the decision itself, they may be angry about how that decision was communicated. A ruling can be technically correct and still create chaos if the explanation is weak. A punishment can follow the regulations and still feel unfair if nobody understands the reasoning. That gap between decision and explanation is where suspicion grows. Why was one driver blamed? Why was another not punished? Why did the judgment arrive when it did? Why did a similar incident receive a different outcome? Without clear answers, people begin creating their own. Teams protect their drivers. Fans defend their favorites. Former racers compare old cases, and the original incident becomes almost impossible to discuss calmly. This is how one controversy spreads beyond the paddock. The anger becomes part of the championship story. Every future decision is judged against it. Every similar move brings the argument back. And officials are forced to defend not only the new ruling, but the consistency of everything that came before. That pressure can become enormous. Because Formula One decisions are rarely simple. A camera may show one angle. The driver may feel something different inside the car. Telemetry may reveal another layer. The officials must combine all of it, then decide what happened in seconds. Was the move under control? Was enough space left? Was the contact avoidable? Did someone gain a lasting advantage? Those questions can sound clear. In reality, they are often difficult. Two reasonable people can study the same incident and reach different conclusions. That does not automatically mean the system is broken. But when drivers repeatedly believe the conclusions do not match, Formula One has a credibility problem, and credibility is difficult to rebuild. The sport cannot simply tell drivers to accept every decision. Drivers are the people taking the risk. They feel the car move beneath them. They know when grip disappears. They know when another driver has left enough space. They know when a situation feels manageable and when it feels dangerous. Their view is not perfect. Emotion can influence it. Competition can influence it. Self-interest can influence it. But their experience cannot be dismissed. That is why strong criticism from drivers carries weight. It may be emotional. It may be incomplete. But it often reveals where confidence is beginning to crack. And if several drivers reach that point after Hungary, the problem becomes much larger than one team defending its result. It becomes a question of whether the competitors believe the system understands the reality inside the car. That question is uncomfortable. Officials work with evidence. Drivers work with instinct, pressure, and physical risk. Both sides see the same sport from completely different positions. The officials see the regulation. The drivers feel the consequence. When those perspectives separate too far, conflict becomes inevitable. But here's the part most people overlook. Driver anger can also influence the teams. A team cannot ignore a driver who believes a rule is unclear or a safety issue has been mishandled. The driver may be protecting his position. He may also be protecting the car, the team, and the people around him. If the concern is repeated, team principals become involved. They request explanations. They challenge interpretations. They search for examples from previous races. And soon the argument moves into formal meetings, private discussions, and political pressure. That is when the issue stops being temporary. Formula One operates through competition on the track and negotiation away from it. Teams do not only build cars, they defend their interests. They study regulations. They argue over wording. They push for changes that may help them or protect them from future damage. One driver complaint can therefore become the first step in a much larger battle. A battle over the rules. A battle over enforcement. A battle over who gets to define fair racing. And Hungary may have opened that door. The source does not prove which issue caused the reaction. It does not show whether the criticism concerned penalties, safety, racing standards, or another problem entirely. But the scale of the headline suggests the concern was presented as something Formula One could not simply ignore. That is the key. Drivers can complain and move on. Huge problems begin when the complaint connects to the future. When drivers believe the same issue will return. When teams believe the same uncertainty could cost them points. When officials face pressure to change the way decisions are made. And when fans begin questioning whether the result on Sunday can be trusted by Monday. That last point may be the most damaging of all. Formula One depends on emotional certainty. Fans watch a driver cross the line. They understand who won. They understand who lost. They remember the battle. If that experience is constantly followed by confusion, delays, or contradictory explanations, the sport becomes harder to trust. Not because the rules should never be enforced after the race. Sometimes they must be. But every late decision creates a cost. The result feels less immediate. The celebration feels less secure. The audience begins waiting for confirmation before believing what happened. And that weakens the emotional power of the finish. The Hungarian Grand Prix may have triggered exactly that kind of concern. Again, the source does not provide enough detail to confirm it. But if driver anger was focused on the way decisions EDS were handled, Formula One would face two problems at once: the original incident and the damage created by the response. The first can be explained. The second can last. Because once drivers believe their concerns are not being understood, they speak more openly. Once teams believe rulings are unpredictable, they prepare more aggressively. Once fans believe decisions lack consistency, every future penalty becomes controversial before the explanation even arrives. That is how trust erodes. Not in one dramatic collapse. One questionable moment at a time. One unclear explanation at a time. One comparison that officials struggle to answer. And this is where the next part becomes even more important. If the drivers were truly lashing out after Hungary, what were they trying to achieve? Were they releasing frustration? Were they demanding clarification? Or were they warning Formula One that the next incident could create consequences the sport is not prepared to handle? Because anger can disappear. A warning does not.